So, SpongeBob Season 17. Yep, it's really gone on for that long. The first 2 episodes of the season both have similar sorts of stories that have some sort of commentary about the creative process. It almost feels like they're trying to tell us something. While the episodes themselves suffer from quite a bit of modern SpongeBob rot, there's something to them that I think speaks to current attitudes towards media. Let's take a look at the 2 premiere episodes of SpongeBob Season 17, The Nerds and The SquarePants Method, and ask ourselves if there's some hope for this show. Chapter 1. The Nerds. The Nerds opens on Squidward being annoyed with SpongeBob and Patrick reading a comic book too loudly. It's a tried and true SpongeBob type of opening, but I think it's missing 2 major things. First off, it leans too much into the SpongeBob and Patrick being loud, and that being the thing that annoys Squidward. Compare this opening, where SpongeBob and Patrick are just kind of yelling while reading a comic book, to the opening of Naughty Nautical Neighbors. In that episode, SpongeBob and Patrick are doing something that annoys Squidward, sure, but that annoying action is much more creative, with them sending messages to each other through bubbles. The bubble messages still communicate that SpongeBob and Patrick are childish, but the childishness is much more endearing and, perhaps more importantly, doesn't annoy the audience as well. The Nerds' opening is just a little too straightforward. They're just kind of yelling out the things that are happening in their comic book. I'm not saying that SpongeBob and Patrick shouldn't act childish. They have always acted childish, but there's an element of subtlety where I think if they just toned it down a little bit, it could have been a much stronger opening. The other thing that I think the opening lacks is establishing Squidward as an artist. The opening line of the episode is literally just him saying, "Time to make art." And I get it. You know, you've been working with this artist character for 25 years now, and you've used up a lot of different ways to establish his artsy-fartsiness. But I think if you just dug a little bit deeper, you'd probably be able to find something. The opening of Band Geek starts with Squidward just playing the clarinet, but it immediately goes into the bit with the doctor mistaking Squidward's clarinet playing for a dying animal, which immediately shows Squidward's insecurity about his level of artistic talent. The Nerds would go on to be a Squidward-focused episode that highlights his insecurities as an artist. And one line where he says time to make art doesn't immediately communicate that, and that's why I felt it was lacking. Squidward then makes a comic book because SpongeBob and Patrick promise to leave him alone if he makes one. And then there's this sudden art style change that shows the Super Imbeciles comic that Squidward made. While an art style change is cool, I think this is another symptom of the episode not really knowing what it wants to do. As a viewer, I see this art style change and I think, I guess that's going to be the rest of the episode now. It's going to be a superhero parody. I am glad, though, that the episode did not go in that direction. In general, when a show like modern SpongeBob goes in that direction, it just kind of leans into all of the parody and ends up not being a very good episode. It seems like the team behind the show saw an opportunity to do an art style change and took that opportunity because it stands out to the audience. But something just standing out to the audience isn't really enough, and like I said earlier, the actual arc from Squidward is decent. So taking a few minutes to do this random comic book parody is not only kind of trite on its own, but it actively undermines the story. I also have conflicting feelings on the whole super imbeciles thing. Sure, Squidward calls them imbeciles all the time, so it makes sense that he would title the comic that. It's perfectly in character. When SpongeBob and Patrick actually embrace the whole super imbeciles thing and keep saying stuff like, "I am stupidity sponge," it just kind of makes me roll my eyes. I get it. SpongeBob and Patrick don't get offended when Squidward calls them imbeciles. Again, perfectly in character. But I think that to see them outright calling themselves imbeciles in this kind of tone leans just a little too much into, forgive me sounding like your mother 20 years ago, glorifying stupidity. It's kind of the same criticism that I have of Pest of the West with the whole idiot friend thing that I mentioned in my SpongeBob period piece specials video, link in the description. I have no problem with cartoons referring to their characters as dumb or stupid or idiots. In fact, having characters be so exaggeratedly stupid is a big part of what makes cartoons cartoons. But when said dumb character embraces being dumb in this sort of shameless way, it just comes off as a bit too self-aware. And what makes a dumb character funny is the fact that they don't know they're dumb. Another big issue with them actually showing the comic book is that the scenes after we see the comic book have all of the characters talk about how great the comic book is, and it becomes this big sensation spearheaded by Bubble Bass. In fact, I really liked the scene with Bubble Bass where they called him King of the Nerds and he read the comic book with this whole suspenseful moment where SpongeBob and Patrick are nervous for his approval. It's a really well done scene that takes the story of this episode seriously, but it would have been improved if we didn't actually see anything of this comic book other than the cover, because then all I would be thinking about is the character's reaction to the comic book, rather than comparing that reaction to the comic book to what I was just shown in the art style change sequence before. And since what I was shown of the comic book was so generic, I don't find myself believing that it would become this popular in universe. It's kind of like how I can believe that the Krabby Patty is the most delicious thing in the world despite having not tasted it myself. Since there's no way for me to actually try it myself, I just have to trust that the characters' reactions are accurate. So from here, I think you can already kind of guess where this story is going. You have Squidward, who is someone who wants to be known as a serious artist, suddenly gets really popular based off of something that he didn't intend to be popular. He even goes as far as to say this:
"That's junk I slopped out to make fun of you two idiots."
I find it interesting they use the term slop, since it's a more contemporary term for garbage content that's pushed out really quickly. It doesn't completely rob SpongeBob of its timeless feeling. I could see Squidward saying something like this even if it weren't the slop-infested mid-2020s, but I definitely do get a hint of some topical commentary towards content being churned out when someone isn't exactly passionate about it. More on what the writers might have been trying to say with that later. So the conclusion of the story is that Squidward makes a second issue, but this time he's too hyper-aware people want to see it. So he makes a bunch of his own artistic choices, and the second issue ends up being a big failure. Even though this was basically how I would expect the ending to go, I don't mind it because it told us something about the character. So all in all, I think The Nerds is an above-average modern SpongeBob episode, which was bogged down by just a few unfocused moments. While I liked the episode, I couldn't help but notice some going through the motions writing. As discussed in one of my more recent videos, modern SpongeBob is going through the motions. Things like Squidward saying, "time to make art," SpongeBob and Patrick being loud, the whole sequence where they were inside the comic book. These sorts of things felt quite unfocused. And it leans into my theory from my modern SpongeBob is going through the motions video that because the writers aren't given enough time to really put together the episodes, they end up having to keep in these going through the motions moments. When I truly think that an episode with this story, if you sat down and really tied it all together and understood what it was trying to say, it could have gone from something good to great. But I think that the way that modern SpongeBob is structured, it doesn't allow for great. And to give credit to the people behind the show, the fact that within that structure, they can still tell good stories from time to time is nice to see. But I know they can do better. Chapter 2. The SquarePants Method. The SquarePants Method revolves around a famous actor getting cast in a role based off of SpongeBob, so the actor has to study SpongeBob at the Krusty Krab in order to play the part. It's a unique premise that sets the episode apart from the other episode I immediately thought of when I thought SpongeBob episode about making a movie. You know, that one where they tried to make the Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy movie and SpongeBob said actors with the big live-action yellow mouth. But while that episode focused on creating and directing a movie, this episode focuses more on the process of acting. The famous actor fish is a parody of Marlon Brando called Marlon Branzino, because a Branzino is a fish. But Marlon Brando's first name is Marlon, which is also a fish. So it's kind of odd to turn his last name into the name of a fish, and keep the first name that was also a fish. Maybe the writers were aware that BoJack Horseman already made a joke where a Marlin was Marlon Brando. I gotta give him some credit for being that original, if that was in fact the reason why they didn't make him a Marlin. Also, Marlon Brando, I think, was a really good choice for the actor parody. It's a bit of a dated reference, I don't think the kids are getting this one, but that does kind of help give SpongeBob its timeless feel that I was talking about earlier. By choosing an actor so ubiquitous, he just represents movie acting as a whole. And also an actor that was very well known, for better and for worse, for being a method actor. Also, small little continuity nitpick that I think you'll get a kick out of. There's a joke where Marlon Brandino comes out of his big limousine boat thing and steps on a bunch of people who get in front of him in a typical, setting up this guy as a celebrity and he thinks he's better than everyone kind of thing. But for some reason, one of the people he steps on is Howard Blandy from the episode Selling Out. And in that episode, Howard Blandy was established to be like super rich, so I don't know why suddenly he's got a job as a guy who gets stepped on by Marlon Brandino. Anyway, if there's any aspiring SpongeBob theorists in my audience, the Howard Blandy went broke theory. Have at it. Actually, don't have at it. Maybe I want to do that one. I don't know. I'm thinking about doing some SpongeBob theories. So big points in favor of the SquarePants method. It's a very funny episode. And the reason it's a funny episode is because it sets up its premise well, and it takes that premise seriously. Sure, it writes good jokes, but the reason it can even write those good jokes is because it's done the story work to make those jokes succeed. I think the big payoff comedy-wise is the scene where Marlon Brandino is all in SpongeBob's costume, and he's making Krabby Patties with like this really serious look on his face. I think what I appreciate about this moment is that the joke works because SpongeBob is such a long-running show. We've known for 2.5 decades now that SpongeBob makes Krabby Patties. So this premise of an actor being super serious while grabbing the lettuce and the bun, it's all enhanced because we are just so aware that this is what SpongeBob does. It's scenes like this that make me remember why I don't advocate for SpongeBob to get canceled. With all of my criticisms of the show, with all of my modern SpongeBob doesn't understand X videos, I have never felt that the solution to SpongeBob's problems would be to just can the show. It's a show that, if done well, can keep going. And in this moment right here, it was done well. Oh yeah, also the Krusty Krab gets destroyed in this episode. The film crew blows it up for their big special effects shot. So had this episode existed at the time, it would have been in my ranking every time the Krusty Krab got destroyed video, where I ranked how much Mr. Krabs did or did not deserve to lose his restaurant. If you're curious where I would have placed this episode, it would have been after Pat No Pay and before the Krusty Plate. Basically, Mr. Krabs did narratively deserve to have the Krusty Krab destroyed because he was so distracted by the money he was being paid, he didn't realize one of the things he agreed to was the destruction of the restaurant. Chapter 3. Squidward in Modern SpongeBob. So something I noticed about these two episodes is that they both have Squidward undergo a character arc. This is obvious when you look at the nerds, it's clearly a Squidward-focused episode, but the SquarePants method doesn't have Squidward in as much of a prominent role. Now, the reason that Squidward undergoes a character arc in the SquarePants method is a symptom of how modern SpongeBob really struggles to give SpongeBob an actual character arc. So even in a SpongeBob-focused episode, they have to use a more grounded character like Squidward to communicate the themes. And I think that was a part of what made these episodes even capable of having themes in the first place. Squidward as a character is one who still seems to care about stuff, and his traits aren't as easily flanderized as the likes of SpongeBob, Patrick, or Mr. Krabs. So I think a lot of the time, the writers kind of default to Squidward when they want to have some more themes in their episode. And while it's nice to get these character arcs from Squidward, it does make me miss how other characters were able to undergo arcs of their own in the earlier seasons. Like, for the nerds, sure, Squidward is the protagonist of that episode, but SpongeBob and Patrick played prominent roles in being the ones to push his comic book out in the first place. But they're such blank slates that their scenes just kind of exist to waste time until we get to Squidward, who is still, for some reason, allowed to be a real character. The only exception to this is the aforementioned King of the Nerds scene, where we get a rare look at SpongeBob and Patrick being given a moment where they really care about the outcome of something, and we get to see them experience a range of emotions. We need more of that. But this problem is much bigger in the SquarePants method, where SpongeBob in so many ways just kind of feels like a prop rather than a character with wants and desires. The episode does make a central statement about the banality of the film industry, but SpongeBob himself doesn't really learn that lesson. In the beginning of the episode, he's all excited and happy-go-lucky, and there's a moment a little ways in where he gets all exhausted because Marlon Brandino spent 7 hours making Krabby Patties, and while watching that scene, I was like, here we have it. This is where SpongeBob starts to see the flaws in this whole method acting thing and how silly it all is. But no, he just goes back to being all happy-go-lucky in the very next scene. The episode still does communicate its message about the silliness of method acting and the throwaway quick buck grabbing nature of the film industry, but it communicates that message through the angry reactions of Mr. Krabs and, of course, Squidward to the finished movie at the end. And while it's good that the episode was at least able to communicate its themes, I think it was a bit of a missed opportunity that SpongeBob himself, who was the most prominent character in the episode, wasn't involved in that realization. So it seems like this problem is arising because the show has put itself in such a narrow place with what it can do with its more exaggerated characters, and the fact that its least exaggerated character, Squidward, doesn't fall into this trap is an indication that there is something fundamentally wrong with how the show is approaching its characters. And in order for it to get any better, it's going to have to start allowing characters like SpongeBob and Patrick to show a little bit more emotion than just joy and loudness. Chapter 4: A Commentary on Creation. So something that stuck out to me about both of these episodes and why I wanted to cover both of them in one video is that these episodes comment on the creative process. I'm almost wondering if The Nerds is the new writers lamenting the popularity of the early show and wondering why the current show isn't as well liked. You've got an original work, being the first comic Squidward makes, that unexpectedly becomes super big. And now, with that in mind, the new stuff is under so much pressure. I don't know, this is complete speculation, obviously, but it almost feels like the writers are saying, why was the original so well liked, but not our stuff? And if they're looking for an answer to that question, maybe they should subscribe to my channel. And maybe you should too. The SquarePants method also had a cynical view of the movie industry, posturing it as something only concerned with money, resorting to these easy cash grab movies that ignore real acting in favor of CGI-fest explosions. And I suppose who would know better about that than the team behind modern SpongeBob, who I speculate are not given enough time to make the episodes they truly want to make. Something about the SquarePants method that I've been thinking about a lot is that the scene that the movie crew filmed where Marlon Branzino's SpongeBob character laments always doing the same thing, and he does all this serious acting while making burgers, is actually cut out of the in-universe movie. Seriously, in the second to last scene when they're watching the movie starts and it cuts right into Marlon Branzino saying, "Order up." And then the Krusty Krab blows up. So that means that within this episode, the bulk of what Marlon Branzino prepared for ended up getting nixed from the movie in favor of more robot explosions. And if that's not a metaphor for modern SpongeBob not being able to tell real deep stories in favor of a bunch of slapstick and crazy meme faces, then that is some coincidence. Hey, thank you so much for watching. If you're looking for something else to watch, might I recommend my current magnum opus on this channel, where I reviewed every, and I mean every, Camp Coral episode. Or if you want to check out some of my live stream segments where I tear apart AI content farms like Sponge Truths, check out this video right here. If you like what I do and want to see me do more of it, consider becoming a channel member or supporting my Patreon. See you next time.